So everyone knows that if you want to be big and successful on YouTube, then what you have to do is you have to chase trends. You have to focus on what's popular. And so seeing as how I want to get rich and famous like everyone else, today we are going to be focusing on a 2,500-year-old military text, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. The Art of War is a book that everyone has heard of, but most people probably haven't read it. And the reason why is simple, which is just that most of us aren't generals, most of us aren't soldiers, most of us aren't going into battle. My understanding of why this text was written in the first place is that Sun Tzu was essentially a military leader who was writing The Art of the War for the people who were in charge. And the people who were in charge were essentially rich and they were in power and they didn't really care about war, and so they didn't understand it. And so with this book, he's basically trying to outline the basics of war and say, this is how you win a war and this is important to focus on. And so in a lot of ways, this book, The Art of War, is actually just kind of military 101. It's the basics. And even though I'm not going into battle, soon, hopefully, fingers crossed, I think that there's still a lot about this book that can apply to our lives, albeit metaphorically. Also, it's just a really good read. There are a lot of parts of it that are very funny. The copy of the book I read is actually the Barnes & Noble version. It was a copy that was on my family's bookshelf. I don't know why. I don't know who in my family is reading this. In it, as a bookmark, I did find my dad's credit card information from 2006 that was on a receipt from the doctor. So, if I ever go back to 2006 and I have his credit card information, I guess. And my dad doesn't read, so I don't know why he has it unless he just saw it at the bookstore and was like, I should get into reading. And then he picked up a copy of The Art of War, and then he never read it, likely. So anyways, I just saw this book, someone in my family owned it, and then I took it, and now it's mine, I claimed it. Which brings us to our first point, chapter 1.18, all warfare is based on deception. This is an idea that Sun Tzu talks about a lot, basically, the idea that if you're strong, then you should appear to your enemies as weak, and if you're weak, you should appear to your enemies as strong. The reason all warfare is based on deception, basically, is it's just all about trying to gain the upper hand on someone. It's about trying to bait the enemy and trying to get them to attack whenever you're ready to receive their attack. And it's also about trying to trick him into not attacking whenever you can't receive an attack. But in spite of that, in spite of the idea that all warfare is based on deception, one thing that I noticed about Sun Tzu's writing is that he actually seems quite honorable. He wasn't someone who was killing people just for the sake of killing. He was very much focused on winning the war. I really love chapter 2.6. There's no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. I think this is true, and I think that the US could really learn a lot from this bullet point. I also love the point following it. It is only one who is thoroughly acquainted with the evils of war that can thoroughly understand the profitable way of carrying it on. In other words, you shouldn't take advice on strategy from people who have no clue what they're talking about, which I think is just kind of good advice all around. I think pretty often people will give you advice about your situation in life and it's clear that they just do not understand. Sun Tzu also is a big fan of rewards. He says that you should reward people who do well, and more than that, you should be generous with your rewards. Sun Tzu is talking about practicalities, and so basically he's like, if people are doing a good job, then you should applaud them and you should reward them for doing a good job. And that's an idea I love because it kind of echoes something that Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, which is that if people want titles, then you shouldn't withhold that from them. You should just give it to them right off the bat. In other words, you shouldn't dangle crap. You shouldn't dangle raises or bonuses or whatever in people's faces and then not actually give it to them, which that's something that I've experienced in my own life, and I've seen it in the lives of many of my friends. Different companies and corporations will do that. They'll promise you a promotion or a raise of some kind, and then they'll just keep on putting it off and off and off until eventually you quit and then you never received your raise. It's a scam, honestly. But Sun Tzu and Marcus Aurelius say not to do that. In essence, basically, you should reward people for their work, and I think that's a good lesson. One idea that I really love that's actually kind of hilarious, and I don't really think it has any applications to modern day life, it's just a practical idea on how to carry out warfare, which says that what you should do is you should prey on your enemy's resources as much as you can. 2.15 says 1 carload of the enemy's provisions is equivalent to 20 of one's own, and likewise a single pickle of his provender is equal to 20 from one's own store. Basically, this is an idea Sun Tzu talks about a lot. Just warfare is expensive. It's really costly to just wage a long war. And more than that, it's really expensive to try to transport resources. And if you have a big army, then that's a lot of mouths to feed. And so for that reason, if you can steal from your enemy, that's awesome. And he says that you should just steal from your enemy any chance you get, because then you get free resources and also you're taking from them, and also you don't have to worry about transporting your own resources. So basically he just makes a big deal out of this, that stealing from your enemy is awesome. And it's something that he harps on quite a bit, actually. And also he'll just kind of name things, which is funny. So regarding what I'm talking about, stealing from your opponent, he says this is called using the conquered foe to augment one's strength. And so he'll just kind of like name crap like that, basically, and be like, I have created a name for this this idea. But the names are usually pretty long and they're not very catchy. Going back to what I was saying about him being honorable, he says in 2.19, in war then let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. And so there you have that idea that basically war should not be waged for its own sake, but war should be waged for a specific reason, for some kind of objective. In 3.1, he says, in the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it, not so good. So too, it is better to capture an army entire than to destroy it, to capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company entire than to destroy them. And so again, he's not out here just trying to kill people for the sake of killing people, but he's trying to be smart about it. Because if you capture people, then you have prisoners of war that can be traded and exchanged and whatever, I guess. And he actually does say somewhere in here that you should treat them well. Basically, if you have prisoners of war, then you should feed them and you should take care of them. I think this is a really interesting point of view because of the fact that he is sort of acknowledging that if you're trying to capture a certain region, then those people are going to be under you, and so you don't want them to absolutely hate you. And let's be clear, I'm not advocating for conquest or anything like that, but I think it's a really interesting point here that I hadn't considered before. I like 3.9, if equally matched, we can offer battle. If slightly inferior in numbers, we can avoid the enemy. If quite unequal in every way, we can flee from him. Basically, it's just about knowing when to fight and when to run away. An idea that I really love that he talks about here is having something to fight for, being honorable, essentially. There's also this idea that he talks about a lot that goes back to the idea that all warfare is based on deception, where he says that you shouldn't even let your own men know what you're doing. Basically, you should just give them parts and pieces, but you shouldn't give them the whole picture. And so Sun Tzu presents a picture of warfare that is very much based on smoke and mirrors. I think that part of the reason why he says that you shouldn't let your forces know what you're doing, basically, is because then if you have spies in your camp, then they'll know what you're doing. I do have to wonder also if part of the reason why you shouldn't let your men know what you're doing is because then if you don't know what you're doing, they'll just assume that you know. Like, I feel like whenever he talks about deception in warfare, he's referring to the enemy, but he's also referring to your own allies. No one should know what you're doing except for you, which is kind of funny. And he talks a lot about being adaptable in warfare. 6.27 and 28 read, all men can see the tactics whereby I conquer, but what none can see is the strategy out of which victory is evolved. Do not repeat the tactics which have gained you one victory, but let your methods be regulated by the infinite variety of circumstances. 6.32 says, therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. The point he's making is pretty obvious, which is that you should switch your strategies up, you should change things around. You shouldn't assume that just because one thing has worked before in the past that it will work again in the future. And that's an idea that I really love. I'm very much someone who believes that you should adapt. I don't think that you should go through life doing the exact same thing over and over and over, day after day after day. I think that's going to get stale and boring, and I think sooner or later it's just going to get old. I think that you can only do the same thing for so many times before it just kind of falls apart. I think that's true of bands that make records, for instance, because you hit the point of diminishing returns very quickly. Same goes for games, same goes for books. If you're just making the same thing over and over again, what's the point? And obviously warfare is a bit different than making a record or writing a book, but he's saying that doing the same thing over and over again doesn't work in warfare either. He talks a lot about how to handle your men, basically, and how to handle large groups of people. 7.25 says, the host thus forming a single united body, it is impossible either for the brave to advance alone or for the cowardly to retreat alone. This is the art of handling large masses of men. Basically, the idea is that you have to consider everyone's different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to make them work together. If people are eager to attack, then you have to rein them back, and then if people are scared of attacking, then you have to push them forward. One idea I find really interesting, 7.36, when you surround an army, leave an outlet free, do not press a desperate foe too hard. He talks about this idea later on, but whenever people are desperate, that means that they're more willing to fight and potentially win. And so he's saying that you shouldn't push people too hard. You should attack them, but you shouldn't make them feel like they're entrapped and in a cage. Because if they feel like that, then they are bound to fight for their lives. And on top of that, if they escape, they'll think that they escaped when really you let them free, which goes back to the idea that all warfare is based on deception. Chapter 9 is kind of fun because of the fact that he just talks about like the different places you can wage warfare. Bullet point 3 says after crossing a river, you should get far away from it. And he talks about this, that if you see your enemy force coming out of a river, you shouldn't attack them while they're in the river. You should attack them after half of their people have crossed the river. Because if you're on the side that they're crossing to, then you can basically chase them back into the river. And rivers are dangerous, so get away from the river. Sorry, it's just kind of funny. I like this book a lot because number one, it reminds me of Age of Empires 2, which is all the footage that I've been playing behind me. But also it just has a very different view of warfare that's like more honorable and more thought out and more good-natured than, you know, what we have come to regard warfare as, which is just bombs and nuclear bombs and mines and shooting people in the head, and it definitely harkens back to an older time. This book is 2,500 years old, by the way, and so to put that in perspective, whenever Jesus was born, this book was 500 years old, which is crazy to think about. I also mentioned Meditations by Marcus Aurelius earlier. This book is about 1,000 years, not quite 1,000 years, older than that. 10.25 says, regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look on them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death. So this just goes back to the idea of treating your soldiers well, basically. Reward them and care for them, and don't just treat them as disposable bodies. Chapter 12 is just about attacking with fire. There are a lot of ideas present that I think we can apply to our own lives, albeit metaphorically, but at the same time, you can't really apply attacking with fire to your own life. Because again, it's just a guide on how to kill your enemies with fire. And then chapter 13, the final chapter, is just about spies and why they're useful and why you should use spies every chance you get, and also why they're super valuable. He does say that if a spy lets out information before the time is ripe, then you need to kill the people who know it. So Sun Tzu can be kind of brutal sometimes, but that's the art of war, baby. So to sum this up, The Art of War is actually a really good read. It's a super quick read. It's like 50 pages or something. And after reading it, I think it's just kind of funny the way that the book is kind of seen in the general imagination. I was thinking of a comparison, but it feels like in the same way that Alice in Wonderland is often used to depict weirdness, it feels like The Art of War is kind of the same thing, where anytime you see The Art of War in some kind of book or movie or something, it's always being read by someone who is like scheming and plotting. But if you actually read the book, then you would know that yeah, it does have good warfare tactics, but at the same time, it's just kind of a fun read. It's the kind of book that I think people who have read it have a very different opinion of than people who have just heard about it. Because again, whenever you hear about The Art of War, a 2,500-year-old military instruction manual, basically it sounds very intense. It sounds like something that will be like big and scary. But really, it's kind of fun. This book was written like 1,000 years before the Dark Ages in the West, which is kind of crazy. And so at least for me, I think that my understanding of history is very incomplete, and there's a lot of gaps for sure. And so I think this book works as a great reminder that like China had a lot going for it 2,500 years ago. It was actually a really advanced civilization. And so The Art of War is worth checking out, I think, if you're interested. Let me know if there are any warfare tactics that stand out to you or that you find particularly funny. But yeah, this is very much a book from a different era, and I think it's awesome. I loved it. So thank you for watching. Have a nice night, and goodbye.